Okay, now let me go ahead and share. I wish there was a way you could do this before you go live.
Right. Set it up.
Feels so tedious.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, we are live and we are on Facebook. So, welcome everyone to our August book club. Tonight, we have our live author talk with Pamela Seelig, author of Threads of Yoga: Themes, Reflections, and Meditations to Weave into Your Practice. So, I'm so thrilled to have you here. I had you on the podcast. A little while ago. I don't remember when that aired, but anyone that wants to check that out can go find that as well on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. But I'm excited to dive into your book a little bit deeper today, Pamela.
Great. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's just start. Just give us, for anyone who maybe hasn't read it or who hasn't finished it, just kind of a cliff notes of what the book is about.
Okay. Well, it's really about the philosophy of yoga. It's not the postures, as so
Right.
many books are about. When I was teaching, I still am teaching, but when I started teaching, I always tried to bring in some of the philosophical concepts. I kind of weave it into class. And because I love the philosophy of yoga. I love the physical practice as well. But I found talking about the philosophy really challenging. Try to not sound cheesy or sound like you're preaching, but I felt like it was really important to get the information into class. And I was always searching for a book to help me with that. And it was really hard to find. I could find snippets of things to bring into class from different books, but I decided to write a book that would kind of break down different chapters of different themes to bring into a yoga class. Or if you don't teach, if you just love yoga and you want to learn a little bit more about the philosophy, like a little bit more than you can learn in a 60-minute class or 90-minute class, a teacher can only bring in so much.
Right.
So that's really where the book stemmed from. And so the beginning just starts with what is yoga? And then why do we do yoga? And then some of the practices and different aspects of yoga other than the postures. And it's really inspired by the Yoga Sutras written by Patanjali, that ancient text, which is, kind of a foundational text of yoga, talking about the philosophy. The postures are included, but it sort of introduces the 8 limbs of yoga with the postures as one limb. So that's really what the book kind of tries to encompass.
Mm-hmm. And you kind of have it broken into, part 1, themes and practices inspired by the Yoga Sutras, part 2, the yamas and niyamas, and then part 3, the chakra system, which I love. I'm a big fan of all the chakras. And I like how each chapter is it's fairly short. You give a
Mhm.
little overview, and then you always end it with a quote. And you give some guidance for meditation for the class or your own practice. And
Mhm.
yeah, I've enjoyed going through it myself.
Oh, thank you. Well,
Yeah.
initially it started as a book for teachers, but then as I was writing it, I realized, I have so many friends, so many people that practice yoga or they don't have any interest in yoga, but sort of want to know what the fuss is about. Like
Right.
why is this, 2000 plus year practice still a thing? It's not an exercise trend. What is that? And that's really what I was hoping to um, get through in the book.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, what is your favorite part of the book?
Well, I think for
I know
me,
that's a trick question, but
no, I think, for me, sort of the light bulb or the most transformative aspect of yoga for myself, and I think probably for a lot of people because of how our culture is now, but Patanjali writes the Yoga Sutras, these 196 little statements, not quite sentences. The first one's now we begin yoga. The second is, what is yoga? And Patanjali writes, yoga is the quieting of the mind.
Mm,
So, and that's what it is. He goes on to explain how to quiet the mind through these postures, meditation, etc. But that sort of kept me busy for at least 10 years, trying to quiet the mind, not totally, but quiet it down. And then after a little while of practice and study, I kind of went to the next sutra, which I'd read many times, but I never really thought about it. So, and when you say your favorite sutra, it's the third sutra. So, yoga is the quieting of the mind, is the second. And then the third sutra says, why? Why do we even do it? And Patanjali writes, and then the seer abides in her true nature. So, yoga is the quieting of the mind, and then the seer abides in her true nature. So, we do it to know who we are, to know, to be now we say authentic self, or there's, language changes, but the yogis say our true nature or true essence. So I always thought that who I was my physical body and my mind. And I think most people think that's who you are, these thoughts and our mind, our choices, our body. But yoga teaches, if you think that, it's a great tragedy because you don't know, then you don't realize who you really are. And only by quieting down in the mind can we get a glimpse of what it is behind that, of who you are, of your true nature. So to me, that's my favorite part. Like, oh, first of all, the idea that you can quiet your thoughts was big. I didn't realize,
mm,
I thought thoughts were like the wind. They just happen and there's nothing you can do about it. Yoga says, nope, you can quiet those down. Here are some techniques. And when you do that, then that's what yoga says, you wake up. If you don't do that, you're asleep, which is fine.
mm.
You can have a perfectly fine life. But when you wake up, it's like, I always think of Dorothy and the Wizard of Oz, like coming out of, everything's in color. Oh, that's what life is about. Or that's the potential that we all have. So so that to me is the transformative aspect of yoga that I just really want. I think everyone should know that it's a practice awakening. May happen, may not, or it's incremental, but the idea I think is so beautiful.
Yeah. And, I believe our body tells us everything we need to know, right? And we just have to take the time to listen to it. And it's
Yeah.
that quieting of the mind that allows us to go deeper into ourselves and listen. It tells us everything, right? How we're feeling, if something hurts, if maybe we need some different nourishment. It's telling us. We just have to make that effort to listen to it.
Right. And that's a practice because I know for me, when I
Definitely.
did the postures, the first time I did postures or asana in Sanskrit, it's really the first time I really brought awareness into my physical body in a conscious way. And when you do that over time, you you get the ability to listen to your body. You feel your awareness is in your body. You recognize the intelligence. But that's a practice. It takes some time, and that's the breath, that's holding the postures, being a little bit uncomfortable, and the experiencing. It's very profound and deep practice, even from the physical side. So
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think myself, like many others, when we're first introduced to yoga, it's typically more of an exercise class, and you just think it's exercise. And
Mhm.
then I discovered a different teacher, and I learned, more about the philosophy and how much more there is to yoga, and there's 8 limbs. And um, I think that's a lot of people's journey, right?
Mhm.
Like I'd say probably the average person comes into it that way. Um, and I think your book is such a good way to get into the philosophy, like you said, with in little bite-sized chapters,
Mhm.
without having, because like Patanjali's, it can be hard to read
Mhm.
through that and decipher it. And it can be challenging,
Yeah.
where something like this helps break it down, especially the yamas and niyamas, and then again, like you said, the sutras in the first part. So what kind of led you, I think you've kind of touched on it, but what led you to creating this into a book?
Mhm. Well, I think it was really, for me, the practice was great. I practiced for 10 years and then I began teaching. And teaching was so rewarding. It is so rewarding if all the teachers there out there. Um, it's so gratifying. I had my own studio for many years, and it's just an extension. I just wanted to share this information to more people because I do think our modern culture, it's yoga is kind of people are suffering. There's anxiety,
Yeah.
there's depression, there's people seeking and not knowing where to go. And I think that yoga really does answer a lot of the
Yeah.
questions that are out there right now. I know right now it may be always that way, but I feel it now as
Yeah.
technology and everything's going so quickly. And yoga is about wait, stop, feel, breathe, experience,
Yeah.
know. And that's easy to say and it's easy to read about. But when you actually do the practice, like you were saying with your body, I could say all these words and anyone else, you could read an article, but you have to experience the practice for yourself. And when you do, it really does change everything. I've seen it for myself, of course, but so many people, we've over the years that have, begun a yoga practice, taken, I've seen the changes and it's
Mhm.
really beautiful. And I do think if we want to have a better world, the
Yeah.
way to do that is one person at a time. And besides that, it just makes you personally happier. Life isn't perfect. It's not always happy and puppies and rainbows, but here are some tools when things, really hit the fan. So sharing it is just so fulfilling in every way. So I'm very grateful.
Yeah, the raising of the collective vibration, right? Um, the more vibrations that we can raise, the better for everyone, right? Everyone
Yes.
around us.
Yes. And that I think what you're saying is actually that's my next book is about that,
I love it.
the collective vibrate, because I think that's sort of the next step is like why again, like if you've been practicing a long time, you're meditating, you know, what's happening and what does that mean? And I think it is all about vibration and frequency and what happens when you do live in a little bit of a higher state, not higher as in better or superior in
Right,
any way,
right,
but
right.
in a little bit more of vibratory rate. You're not down at those base superficial feelings all the time. You have a way out and you're kind of starting to live in that space. What's that about? And that's yoga practice, is this personal development, awakening, and the collective, of course, which is beautiful.
Hmm. Mm. Yeah, I love that. So let's talk a little bit about the chakras chapter or
Mm,
or section.
yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about that section. We've touched
Okay.
on the sutras and yeah,
Yeah, so Patanjali did not go into that in the Yoga Sutras. He really didn't mention. So initially that was not going to be in the book, but I really felt like teaching people were always curious about the chakras, and
right.
people had sometimes the wrong idea, or sort of coming from different places. So I tried to make it, simple, yet there are ancient texts that do describe these energy centers. Chakra is just a word that translates from Sanskrit. It's chakra. In English, it's wheel. That means a swirling vortex of energy. And basically, we have nadis, which are pathways of energy that run throughout our body. And the where two pathways meet creates this kind of vortex of energy. And the main pathways run along our spinal column. So the 7 primary chakras run along the spinal column. Now there's different ways. You could say there's 10 if people look at different.
Right.
There's some above the body and below the body. So I'm just saying the 7. That's not, there's other perspectives. So, and these chakras actually are very fascinating, and we can feel them in our own lives. They're associated with nerve plexus or nerve groupings, but it's the root chakra, the tailbone, which has to do with survival and um, sort of coming together of people and what draws us to join a group. The next chakra is the sacral center, which is our reproduction, some creativity. The solar plexus is in the middle of our body, and that's our sense of will, a little bit of ego in there. And so those are called the lower 3 chakras, and they are really about survival, procreation, and our sense of self. And some people just stay there. It's sort of like living for yourself for survival. But then with the personal evolution, the energy moves up. It's always flowing all, but more energy moves up into the heart center, which is about connection with others, feeling what others are feeling, that energetic center. And then our throat is about expression, creativity, and speaking our truth, being authentic.
Mm.
And then the 6th is our third eye center, which gets into more of the mystical, our intuition,
Mhm.
and our visions and dreams, and our sort of inner movie theater. And then the crown chakra is at the top of our head, the crown of our head, and that's our connection to all that is, or something greater than ourselves. And when we work with each chakra, what we're doing is balancing these centers and creating a nice flow, a nice balanced flow of energy so we can live to our potential. And most of us have energy centers that are really solid and balanced, and usually a couple that are maybe a little bit imbalanced. Like some people, they have trouble speaking, and they
Mm.
always get a lump in their throat. It's like when you're talking to your boss and you're asking for a raise, or you're trying to just ask for something, and you can't do it. Or some people can't stop talking. It's a little too much energy there. They
Right.
just can't stop. I've been in that where I'm talking, my mind is saying, stop talking. I just continue. A little too much energy there. So with awareness and understanding that, yoga has different techniques to work with each of the chakras. And I think it can be a very helpful tool, as well as just more understanding more of who you are, and that we're more than just our physical body and our thoughts. There's
Yeah.
more happening.
Yeah.
So I love the
Yeah.
chakras also.
I do too. And I think yoga is such a complementary, it's such a great way to work with the chakras. And I love
Mhm.
doing chakra practices. And I mean, I've got crystals sitting right here on my desk and everywhere, and I incorporate those too. So
Yeah,
I love the chakras.
right. And when you're doing a yoga practice, you are working with your chakras. Every
You're working with your
posture,
energy, right? I
it's
mean,
it's energy work basically. But certain postures or each posture has an area usually that's really where the energy is focused, like warrior two. Really, any of the warrior poses are about your solar plexus, your power, your confidence. And when that's a little bit low, adding some warrior poses to your practice can really help, or just breathing into those areas can really help give you some strength if you need that for the day. So knowing it, you can use the postures, more specifically for your purposes.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I love that. So, Pamela, what do you hope that the reader gets out of your book? What do you hope that the person who purchases your book and picks it up, what is your hope that they do with this book?
Mm. Well, if you're a yoga practitioner, and I'll say that because I'm sure most of your listeners are yoga practitioners, I really hope that, because when you have a practice, sometimes you forget the power of it. And if you're a teacher,
Yeah.
sometimes you forget the good work that you're doing. Like you just forget, that people are having experiences, really deep experiences in your classes, thanks to you, supporting them and guiding them. Um, so I hope this book re-inspires um, and helps people to remember the importance of being present, um, knowing that we're doing this to uncover who we really are, because that's exactly what the world needs. So it's not a selfish practice to awaken yourself, to spend the time on yourself and the self-care, because the result is what the world needs. And I don't mean the world in a big way, I mean your world.
Yeah.
That's the
Yeah.
most important. So just remembering, being re-inspired. And then, of course, if you're a teacher, hopefully some things can help you. You can make them your own, but there's a lot of great, great quotes and practices that you can use in your classes that um, I hope add to your repertoire.
Yeah. And I was just looking at, there's roughly 30 chapters. And I mean, that gives you 30 classes that it
Yeah.
helps you teach. That's almost, one class a week. That's almost an entire year, right?
Mhm.
Of helpful prompts
Yeah.
for in your class.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope that helps. I really do.
Yeah. And so this is your first book,
Yes.
correct?
Yes. Yeah. My first
And
book.
you already have plans going in the head for a second book.
Yes. Yeah. I'm excited. Yeah. I really enjoyed the process of writing the book. Um, I kind of had the idea for many years. Um, so it was wonderful to see it come to fruition, and I was just very fortunate that it was published. And yeah, so I really enjoy writing. I find it very meditative, um, and I feel that connection when I'm writing, like when in meditation. So it's very gratifying and soothing.
Yeah, I find it therapeutic when I
Yeah,
write. Yeah.
yeah.
So that leads me to my next question. What advice do you have for someone watching who would like to write a book? Like, what advice do you have? Especially maybe they've been thinking about it for years, sort of like you had.
Yeah. Well, I think that the best advice, I guess, is to write it. I know it sounds silly, but you just have to carve the time out, and you could. I think every book has its own story of how it got,
Yeah.
written, but I just it's a lot of mind games, working with your own mind and watching yourself not right, coming up with all the excuses, and then just watching that with, patience, and then just having the discipline and sitting down and doing it. That's not very inspiring, but what helped me was my yoga practice. Like I would have my
Mm,
practice every morning. I would do my meditation, my physical practice, and I would have a set time to write, and I wouldn't vary from that. Now, I wanted to write when my kids were little, and I just couldn't. Like I didn't have the discipline. I couldn't carve out the time. So for me, once the kids went to school, then I could write. So I think you have to work it out for yourself, and hopefully there's a time, that you can be realistic. So, but I think if you just put in your head that you're going to write, you're going to do it, envision
Yeah.
it, and do it, it'll get done.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, you just have to start somewhere. And I think for a lot of people, just it's overwhelming. Like, where do I even start it? And literally just sitting down and writing every day. And you might not have a plan. You might just be writing. It might just kind of be gibberish coming out, but it'll eventually start to flow. And
Yeah.
then you can come up with a plan, right? Like
Mhm.
some people have to have that outline ahead of time. That's not me.
No,
I just write and then wherever it goes, that's where it goes, right?
right.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, just finding what works for you.
Yeah, because even, the great authors, they all had different techniques. So you really do have to, figure it out. And again, know that you can do it. Like know, understand that if you don't have the confidence, maybe work on that, notice that, like in yoga, notice that you're, sabotaging yourself, or your thoughts are negative, or you're making excuses. And with kindness, just notice that, and
Yeah.
then do have your deeper self take charge and say, no, I actually want to do this, and I can do this. So because the mind will, uh the yoga saying, the mind is a, um, terrible master, a wonderful
Yeah.
servant, but a terrible master. So don't let the mind be in charge. Let those
Mm,
the deeper, goals, take charge, a deeper self.
yeah, I like that. Well, Pamela, thank you so much for being here. And again, your book is Threads of Yoga. It's available on Amazon. I assume you can probably get it through most bookstores as well. Um, So anyone that wants to check that out, be sure to order that. And our book club for next month is Yoga for Bendy People by Libby Hensley, optimizing the benefits of yoga for hypermobility. So super excited to have her on again next month or September. And Pamela, any final parting words of wisdom for today?
Well, just thank you so much for having me. I really so appreciate it. And for all the yoga teachers out there, just continue your great work. It's so needed.
Mm, yes. And I think this book would be a great book to have in your studio if you have a little gift shop section. Be a wonderful book to have in there. So much gratitude for you, Pamela, for being here again. You can catch my podcast with her on my Creating Wellness from Within podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And we had a wonderful conversation on there as well. So much gratitude to you, Pamela, for being here today. I really appreciate it. And thank you, everyone, for watching.
Thank you again, Amy.